I would now like to turn the program over to our two co-chairs of our Government Affairs Committee, our leaders, Ashley Odell Hardesty and Jack Thompson.
And I actually married an Odell. I was a Hardesty.
Oh, Hardesty Odell, I got it backwards. Okay.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Just small details, you know. Welcome, everyone. I am so pleased to see this really tremendous turnout today. And thank you to our legislators, our elected officials for being here with us. This is an event that we really look forward to every year, and we've done it for several years now. Jack, as you heard a moment ago, he's our pipes. Jack, the regulator, he also holds the phones, and he's going to be managing our time here today. And just for our audience and our elected officials to know, if we cut you off, we are truly not intending to be rude. We want you all to have as much time as possible to cover a variety of topics. So the format for this morning, and let me back up a little bit and just talk about the purpose of this event. The Chamber and the Government Affairs Committee is committed to giving our members an opportunity to have some real meaningful dialogue with our elected officials. And this is one of the opportunities that we try to provide for our members to do that. We do a send-off event like this before the session, and then we do a report back at the end of session. So be looking for information about that after Easter when these folks are done with session. We'll want to know what they were able to accomplish and talk a little bit about the things that happen during session, because once session gets started, it's kind of chaotic, right? But we have, as a committee, thought about things that we think are important to the business community. We have surveyed our members and gotten a number of responses from our members about things that they would like to talk about with our legislators. So we're going to try to cover all of that. It's a lot of ground to cover. So what I'm going to do, and Jack and I will kind of ping pong off of each other with questions, but I wanted to give each of our legislators an opportunity at the outset to talk for 2 minutes, freestyle, anything you all want to talk about. But we're going to give you 2 minutes to do that, and then we'll dive into some of the questions. So that the audience knows, we did give our legislators a heads up about the areas of inquiry that we were hoping to cover today. So we hope that we're not catching them off guard with anything, but we did give them some advance notice. And as I say in every deposition that I take, I'm a lawyer, you can always change your sworn testimony after the fact if you need to. Just beware, I don't know what that does to your credibility. No, I'm kidding. At any point, if you want to jump back to a question and comment on something that maybe you didn't think about or didn't have the opportunity to finish, please let us know. We'll try to give you all the opportunity to do that. Lastly, we will give you all a chance to have some questions with the legislatures that maybe they had not anticipated. See if we can put them on the spot and really make them work this morning. We did feed them, so they should be ready to go. So that's how the event is going to be managed this morning. So do we have any volunteers to start the freestyle session? John?
Sure.
Okay, all right, Delegate Williams.
Don't be bashful, right? My name is John Williams. I'm a delegate representing the 51st District. That's essentially all of Montague County. I want to thank you all for being here and for participating in this. There's a lot of sayings down in Charleston that allude to the fact that we wonder if people even pay attention to what we do down there. So certainly you all coming here is a good step in making us accountable for the decisions that we make on your behalf under the dome. My first legislative session was about a year ago. It's about coming up on the 1-year anniversary. And I had a relatively good session. One of the big issues that I stood up for was the medical marijuana bill. That was a bill that we did get passed, but it is a bill that I still think needs some changes. It's something that I feel to be a compassionate issue for West Virginians, and I think it will also help the business community in West Virginia. The other issue that I really fought on was the horrible cuts to higher ed. I had a couple House floor amendments that were amending the budget to make a restoration of funds to higher education, to make those cuts not as bad as they would have been. Unfortunately, I wasn't as successful as I would have liked to have been with that endeavor. But a new year is going to be upon us, and so a new opportunity to stand up for those issues and to stand up for West Virginia students who I feel have a future that is well worth our investment as a state. And not only that, in our community here, if we were to open these drapes, you would see how many buildings in this town are related to WVU. WVU is a partner with private business in this town, and I believe that taking any money away from them is rather foolish, especially when one considers the economic statistic that for every one state dollar that is given to WVU, it generates 10 more within our economy. So I believe that investment in WVU is essential. I think a restoration of funds to WVU is essential, and I look forward to talking to you.
I told you, he's tough.
You actually got 5 extra seconds.
Only 5?
Oh, yeah. Oh, he was feeling generous.
All right, thank you, Jack.
Delegate Pethel, would you like to go?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Dave Pethel. I represent the 5th Delegate District, which is all of Wetzel and 1 precinct in the western part of Monongalia County. It's good to be here today, and I want to thank all of you for coming out. What I want to talk about first of all is that I'm glad that the road bond passed. I know in Monongalia County it got slightly more than 80%. In Wetzel it got 79.5%. There were a lot of projects on there for Monongalia County, which I think those are good projects. I totally support those projects. I don't think there's anyone here today that can vote for or against me living in Wetzel or the western part of Monongalia County. I can tell you we have a new district engineer, Donnie Williams, over for District 4, and I have been, working with him along with Delegate Statler and others in your delegation about getting more road work done on Route 7. The people that travel Route 7 to Morgantown, let me say Route 7, it's an embarrassment as to how bad it is. And I'm going to really be working. We are making some progress, but there needs to be more progress made, in my opinion. I've always supported at least most of the projects for Monongalia County. I remember I supported the TIF district, that we got this ballpark over here, and believe me, that was not an easy sell. There were some personalities that got involved in the legislation, and took us a long time to get it, but you can see the result of it. I'm certainly against any further cuts to higher education.
Time, sir.
No, we'll talk more about that later. Thank you.
Yes, we will talk more about that later. Don't worry, don't worry. Okay, Delegate Statler?
I will first, I will first tell you that the best plans that you lay never comes right out exactly. I got you early enough this morning that I could get to the middle of the table, because it seems like the ends always gets picked on to start. So I get there to get to the middle of the table, and what happens? They take the chairs away. So I will tell you, never always plans. I will say to you that I am Joe Statler. I represent the 51st District, which encompasses most of Monongalia County, but foremost, I represent the state of West Virginia. And when we go down there, that's what we got to keep in mind. We represent the state in trying to come out with a balance that we can work all over this state. And yes, we all have that, we want to save our areas, our immediate area, but we still got to bring in the whole state system. I will say to you, the biggest thing that I get coming out of this is I feel that West Virginia is on the cusp of great things happening. We see it here in Monongalia County, I will tell you. But when you're down there talking to the other counties, everybody's not as fortunate as we are in this area. Monongalia, Marion, Harrison, it's just not that way everywhere. So we got to be mindful of that and what's going on. I do believe that the budget will be a little bit easier to handle this year. I don't see that $500 million projection out there that's going to be. So we do see some growth and some things happening. But we truly got to be ahead of the curve and be ready for what's coming to us, because the big thing that we need is we got transportation issues. We all know that, and especially in this area we can see it. And it'll be easy to stand up here and talk for 2 hours on what needs to happen in this area on transportation. And we got to stay. When 80.4% of the county passed a bond, we need to move forward with a unified manner of what we voted for and move forward on those projects and get them out there. They may change somewhat in the way that we saw them, because I don't think the total plan was out there, but we need to look at these plans and move them forward.
Time, sir.
Don't worry, we'll be talking a little bit about roads. Delegate Piles, can you finish us off?
Well, thank you
please?
very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for having members of the delegation to speak, and thank you for sponsoring this event. I went down, I represent Montague County, 51st District, going down for my first term, and it's kind of difficult for a freshman member of the minority party in the legislature. I was not able to accomplish everything that I wanted to, and of course, as the others have said, the biggest disappointment was the budget that was passed with its cuts to higher education and WVU, which will probably lead to more increases in tuition and make college education more expensive for the members of our for the people of our state. But a bill that the counties wanted, that I sponsored, didn't pass, and another bill that the cities wanted didn't pass. But I felt proud of the fact that one of the bills that I did sponsor passed, and that was the tax credit for rehabilitation of historic properties. And it didn't pass during the regular session, but the governor liked the idea and embraced the idea and put it on the special session, and it did pass. I can't claim all the credit because another delegate had sponsored a similar bill, and a senator had sponsored a similar bill. But I felt kind of proud of the fact that the governor embraced this idea, and the Charleston Gazette, just after it was introduced, had done an article about how this concept would create jobs and boost the economy. And that's not something that I really thought of. I'm just an old guy that's been on the Morgantown Historic Landmarks Commission for 30 years, and I like historic buildings. And the Gazette had this article saying how this would create jobs and boost the economy, and that's something all of us went to Charleston to do. And I hadn't really thought of that, but it made me feel kind of proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Sorry.
It's all right.
And Senator Bob Beach.
And we'll keep Joe Statler in the middle now, right?
There you go. Appreciate that, Bob.
Not a problem. Well, good morning, folks. It's good to see you all again. Glad to see such a great turnout. I am Senator Bob Beach, representing the 13th District, which is Morgantown and Fairmont and everything in between. I'm not sure what everyone else here has talked about, so I'll just keep my comments brief. I'm excited for this next session. I'm excited to see what's going to happen with the MOU. It's out here in the community now, and how the legislature will play a role in moving that forward and working with the Chinese government and our local government and the federal government to move and stimulate the gas economy here in Montague County and North Central West Virginia as a whole. But again, I'm happy to be here, and let's get into some questions and answers.
All right. Well, I like where you're headed.
Well under time. We don't save it for later, though.
Okay, so the first topic that we'd like to talk about, and all of you touched a little bit on this. I think Senator Statler, you mentioned that we're on the cusp. West Virginia is ready to launch, and it's all about identifying opportunity for our state and our region to really lead. An issue that has unfortunately affected all of us in this room, whether directly or not, is the opioid crisis. And of course, I think we can all agree that it's devastating for families. Addiction is a terrible thing. The opioid crisis is particularly difficult for this state and for this region. But there is a trickle-down effect of what happens in the family, and that is what happens to our workforce and how that affects our business community and our ability to have economic development, meaningful economic development. So we would like for each of you to take 3 minutes. And some of you may have more to say if you're one of the earlier commenters, and then we can have some discussion later if that's appropriate. But what opportunities do you see? And we know that the WVU facility is going out here. Are there funding opportunities at the legislature that you in particular can champion? What about other legislative initiatives like the Fresh Start legislation that was introduced last year, or the drug testing for welfare recipients? How does medical marijuana play into all of this? So I'll ask for a volunteer, and then I'll just pick somebody if you don't volunteer. Who would like to speak? Okay.
You gonna stay in there?
I'm gonna start it off, and I will tell you that that's a really broad question.
It is.
And we like to give broad answers also, because when you talked about depositions, I've been in depositions, and I know they carry forever. So whatever we say here will carry forever. The first thing I will say when you talk about the opioid crisis that's out there, I will tell you, I'm probably the least person to speak on that. I've been fortunate I don't have any experience with that other than the fact that we see what it's doing to the community. And it's devastating. It is tearing our community up. And although it's bad in this area, it's worse in the southern part of the state. And part of it is brought on because of the unemployment, because of the way the coal market was hit down there, which devastated them more so than us. And people just turn to the bleak things, and they look for relief wherever they can find it. It is something that carries throughout everything. It carries through the workforce. I hear it out there when folks talks about hiring people that, out of 10, they're lucky if they can get 2. 8 of them will not be able to pass the drug screening that's needed. When we're in that type of a shape, we're in bad shape. We're going to have to turn that around. And I think some of it comes from bleakness, as I said earlier, that people sees no hope. So they turn to something to mask at hope. So hopefully, as we move forward in this state, and the gas industry is going to be one of the industries, I believe, that's going to bring us out. We got gas lines out there that's being, FERC is now approving those gas lines once they start going in the ground. And I know there's folks in here that doesn't believe in fossil fuel. That's fine. We can have that conversation, but we've got to use it responsibly. But I do believe once those pipelines starts going to ground, the development's going to start for that, and that's going to be downstream jobs, not only from the gas industry, but from all industries that's out there. When I drove in today, I probably passed 10 trucks that was heading to a gas site to the western end of the county. We truly see what's going on out there with that. So I think that's part of it. Education. As being vice chair of education, every word that comes out of my mouth should be about education. And I will tell you that we've got to have a better educated workforce. What we had in the past is not going to work today. I came out of high school, never went to college, just went straight into the coal industry. I don't regret that. The coal industry was great to me. I was able to succeed, move up in the ranks of the coal industry. So, but that doesn't happen today as much. We need an educated workforce. And the big thing that we're going to have to look at our career and community colleges, as they're the fastest to be able to produce the workers that we need out there to the sources there. Not forgiving the four-year colleges. They also got a part in it. But we've got a lot of work to do.
Let me, before I ask another one of our elected officials to comment on this subject, I assume you all are familiar with the concept of the Fresh Start legislation, and I know the devil's in the details, so we'll keep it broad. We'll keep it way up here at the high level. The Fresh Start legislation, for those of you who don't know, the concept is that folks who have been have been convicted of drug crimes can have that slate wiped clean so that they are employable. And is that a fair characterization? And I hate to put you on the spot, but could you all show of hands for the concept? Are you all in favor of Fresh Start legislation?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, who'd like to go next and talk about this issue?
Well, if I may.
Go ahead.
Is that okay? Well, let's just continue on your train of thought here. We did pass Senate Bill 76, which was our second chance legislation for employment, which didn't expunge the record, but at the same time, it took into consideration various factors that would drop their felony down to a misdemeanor. But that's a long term. That's a long term. It takes 1 to 2 years to implement this and get those charges dropped. So that's something to look at. It's something to work with. But I think in our communities, what we're going to need to really make that take off is that when these folks are coming out of incarceration, is that we have boots on the ground that can walk them through the job process, work directly with them to help them secure employment. And we do it at the college level. There's always someone there to help them locate a job once they exit college, or at least attempt to anyways. And it's the same way at the high school level with our school counselors, excuse me. So I think that's something we have to look at. But of course, like most things, it's going to take money to get that in play. But going back to your original question with opioid, it is an education thing, and it is obviously economics. You talk to anyone south of Flatwoods where the economy is tanked, that's where the drug problem is located. We're very fortunate that we have the natural industry, Mylan Pharmaceuticals, universities, and here in our local community, which all contributed to jobs and also the low opioid use in our communities. So again, I think it's a focus on education and just economic activity.
Is there, and I'm going to give all of you the same opportunity to comment, but I'm curious if you all have thought about ways that this particular part of West Virginia, I know that the opioid crisis may be more severe in the southern part of the state, but what can this part of West Virginia do? I mean, is this the place, we have all these resources with the university and the hospitals to create long-term treatment facilities, but we need the funding. How can the legislature make that happen? And you want to talk, John?
Sure. Maybe to my detriment. I think we need to invest in this issue. I think it's hard to do what I think we did a little bit too much of in the last session and increase penalties on these people and just sort of relegate them to a jail cell. These are people that I would hope that if it was me or if it was a loved one, that our society would make an investment in instead of cutting their losses on. And so I think investment in treatment facilities is essential. And I have some constituents on Facebook who, anytime I vote to give a red cent to any other part of the state, they say I'm not being a good delegate, I'm not representing Montague County. But that's not a good way to be as a legislator, to be collaborative with other people. But it's also not seeing the truth of the matter in that we are connected with the southern part of the state. Their success we will reap the benefits of, and their failures we will feel the pains of. And so I don't believe in just cutting off that part of the state because of their unfortunate times. I think we need to make an investment and maybe show them what prosperity they might have that we have so enjoyed in Montague County in recent decades and hopefully for decades to come.
Delegate Powers or Delegate Temple? Okay, Delegate Powers.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to agree with what, most of the speakers here have already said. I'm fortunate. I was in the school system for 40 years. We've been talking about prescription drug use or illegal prescription drug use for years and years. And I tell students and younger people the best thing is that you just don't start. I have 2 sons, and fortunately, they're grown adults now. I never had to go through that. But I definitely agree with the treatment facilities. That's really, really important, and I certainly would look to the medical community. There's no simple answer on this, and even they can't lots of times give you what's the right answer. But that's just some of the things that I think we should be looking at. I know the governor talked about this at length in the last session about treatment facilities. Treatment facilities are very important. I don't think it does any good to put people in jail or without giving them some type of long-term treatment to help them get back on their feet. And I also support the Second Chance Act that Senator Beach talked about.
Delegate Piles?
Guess I'm last again. We may think that this problem is something in the southern part of the state, but we have the problem here too, and it's getting worse. I was in a discussion group in this room with the Morgantown police chief last year, and he was saying that there were 30 to 40 OD calls a month with 3 to 4 deaths just in the city of Morgantown. Last week he spoke again, and it's now up to 8 deaths a month, as many as 80 OD calls a month. And that's just the city of police. It doesn't include the EMS and the fire departments. So we do have the problem here, and it's getting worse. And in the legislature, one of the things that kept coming up in these discussion groups we were having here was the lack of treatment facilities and the problem of waiting lists to get into some of these facilities. And so the legislature had attempted to close 2 state hospitals, which the governor vetoed, and that will probably come up again. And I had some discussions with Tony Lewis, who has since passed away, a delegate from Preston County, about possibly using the Hopemont Hospital, one of the hospitals they wanted to close, as a possible treatment center for some of these drug problems. That's something we need to do. And if this thing comes up again with closing these hospitals, I hope we'll look at the idea of using those state hospitals as possible treatment facilities.
So it sounds to me, the things that I'm hearing from you all are long-term treatment, education, and how that plays into our workforce. Because, and I think Delegate Sally, you identified that the cause of the problem is some despair and kind of idle time, where we've got all these unemployed folks, and how that unfortunately is kind of a chicken and egg thing. I mean, these folks are now in this situation and we're ready to launch, but we don't have the workforce to support it. So let's move on and talk a little bit about how to pay. Go ahead.
If I can interrupt just for one introduction, if we could, before you go to your next question. Most of us in this room know each other, but I want to take a second to acknowledge the new president of Fairmont State University, who happens to be in the room with us. And if she'll stand, and let's recognize her and give her a round of applause. You're quite welcome. We have Dr. Moore with Pierpont over here this morning, his representative, and Dr. Moore has built a strong relationship with WVU, and I'm sure Dr. Martin will as well. And it's nice to have you with us. Thank you. I'm sorry, Ashley.
No, that's wonderful, because we're actually going to shift into that higher ed conversation that you all touched on a little bit. So I'm going to turn it over to Jack and let him talk a little bit about the budget.
Okay. Obviously, the budget's been a significant issue over the last few years, and everything that we talk about takes money to pay for. So can you talk about expected funding and the budget process and the conversations, but also important issues to people in this room, one of which would be the inventory tax?
You gonna go?
Well, I wasn't going to stand up, but go ahead.
I will say that the budget is probably the single most important issue that we have to deal with down there. I have seen where folks, when you talk about the budget process, sometimes we have to talk about how that process works. And the fact that I know when people just believe when we go into extra sessions, extended sessions, to take care of that budget, it's truly brought on by the way the system is driven. Part of that system is bills are passed up until the last minute of the last day. That last budget or that last bill that passes through can change what the budget will be, because it will either take away money or it will add to money. There's no way that really you can, unless you cut off the time that you can put those type of legislative issues out there, and that's going to be tough because everybody has their bills they want to run. There's no way really of getting that budget. We come close last year to getting it, and of course that budget was not accepted, so we did have to go into extended session. That part I just wanted to put out there. It's not that we want to go into overtime. We truly want to do the best we can. The budget, like I said, is a little bit better this year. Looking, all the indications are that it's not going to be as tough as last year. Nobody likes to make budget cuts. Nobody likes to cut higher education that's out there. And it's just sometimes, we looked at some cuts that could have possibly been as high as 19% cutting into some of these higher education areas. It was a balancing act. At some point in time, you have to come up with a budget. By state law. We are required by the Constitution to have a balanced budget. That means we can only spend what we anticipate taking in. And when you start down with those constraints, then you look at the needs and you get what everybody would like to have and what they want, and somebody is going to take some cuts. It's just simple as that. You may not want to do them, but you've got to, just like your household. When you have so much money coming in at the end of the month, you got to balance it. So now it becomes a faction of where and how do we make those cuts? Who can sustain them and who can't? Higher education, I will tell you, unfortunately, has been the ones that's been hit for the last 3 to 4 years. We've got to stop that. As you heard me say earlier, education is one of the legs of the stool that's got to be to bring this state and move us forward. They've got to be the ones that brings us out of that. So we can't accomplish that by continuing to cut their budgets. And I don't know how much simpler to put it. I can tell you I will not stand up here today and tell you I would not vote on a budget that has cuts to education. I won't do that. I won't tell you that for the simple fact is I don't know for sure what's going to come out between now and the end of session. And I never want to close off the loop until somebody can say, well, he said he would do this. I generally will tell you, the only time I tell you for certain what will be and what I will vote upon is when I'm 99.9% sure of what's going to be in that. You can look at even the budget when it starts out and you don't see the most damaging. And we all work to try to keep the areas that we want in there, to keep it as safe as we can. But at the end of the day, once that thing is back and forth between the two houses, there may be a cut put in some area that you don't like and you try to restore it. For instance, and I'll probably run out of time, but the volunteer fire companies, originally we had a $2 million in there for them to help them pay their workman comp. It ended up, that went through in the first budget. The second budget, it came back. It was not possible to keep that in there. And it ended up being down the line, the third area that if there was money saved or increased tax collection, then that money would be restored. I checked yesterday. We just missed it.
Time, sir.
We'll talk later.
You jumping, Dave?
Okay, who
We give
else?
everybody 4 minutes on this
Yeah.
question, just because
Yeah,
it
we
is so
didn't-
broad.
Okay. We good?
Go ahead.
But, yeah, I agree with a lot of things that Joe said. I think one of the other things, as of yesterday, the Senate doesn't anticipate any cuts in higher ed. Now, that's not to say it won't change here in a few weeks as the governor starts working on his budget. But things look a lot better. We are now 10 years out, almost 10 years out from our most recent economic downturn here in the United States. And West Virginia is usually one of the last ones to come out of it. And it usually takes us about 10 years. So we're at that 10-year mark, and we've always anticipated this being last year being the over the hump kind of thing. So things are going to be a little bit better. Last year was unique in a lot of ways in the fact that we had a new governor. We had a Senate was still trying to get its feet and trying to understand the process. I don't anticipate a long extended session, a budget session, if we go beyond a week, which was typical in years past. It would surprise me if we went that right. The governor's also fortunate to have a very qualified person working as his chief of staff, Mike Hall, who is a former finance chair and has sat on finance in the legislature for 20 or more years. So he understands the process. He understands the working relationship he has to have with the legislature to get a piece of legislation passed. So I'm very optimistic about this year and the following years in regards to our budget. There's things obviously we're going to have to look at and take into consideration. I suspect there will be some smaller cuts in other areas. We understand there's some programs that they want to try and initiate. Obviously, that's going to take some money, so they're going to have to move some funding around there to make that happen. But again, as of this past week during the interims, they didn't anticipate any large cuts to higher ed. Now, public ed's another thing, and there's some things that they want to implement there that will take a lot more money than what we have in place right now. And according to the finance or the Senate education chair, those programs will need some additional cash infusion, so to speak, to get those implemented. So it's going to be a kind of a wait and see. But again, with in regards to the budget, I don't anticipate it taking any longer than years past. Again, last year was kind of that fluke. I can think you can just make that the weak link and just toss it aside and look at the years previous, and that's the direction we'll probably go. But that's what comments on that.
Well, let's hope that last year was a one-off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to ask you all to turn to Eldon for a moment and pretend he's Amy Summers.
Yes, Amy Summers right now. She, as I said, she texted me this morning. She was real sick and she couldn't make it, but she did want to address this budget issue. She pointed out that last year, as some of the people already said, that the budget was actually passed in 57 days, which was a record time. But because of the division as to the governor vetoed it because of the cuts and wanted an additional revenue increases, so you had that conflict. But she does have the same sort of forecast, since there's no mid-year cuts needed this year, that the budget forecast this year is good, and she doesn't anticipate an extended period beyond what Bob just said, beyond the 1 week extension. So she's feeling positive. She also told me if anyone wants to talk to her, her cell number is 304-641.
Did she really say that?
She said that. You can give my cell number out for anyone who needs to talk to me. So I'm not gonna go around and ask. 304-641-1159.
That's my number.
Okay, sorry, Jack. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Summers. Okay, so who, yes. Delegate Piles, would you like to make any comments about the budget and the process?
I think last year we had sort of a crisis with a pending looming budget deficit, and there was some, the reason for the cuts last year, of course, were the lack of revenue, and the House delegates has a tremendous reluctance to passing any kind of revenue bill, but it did seem like there were some revenue bills that had a chance, like a modest increase in the sales tax or something, which would have prevented some of these cuts to higher education and health. And it seemed like sometime around the middle of April or May, there was this miraculous revelation that severance tax collections were running ahead of schedule, and it kind of removed the urgency of passing any kind of revenue bill, and so we got stuck with this voting for this awful budget, which which I voted against because of its cuts to higher education. But it does look, as others have said, it does look better for the coming year in terms of the budget. But the Democrats are going to oppose a rule change that will prevent any discussion of any bill after the 50th day unless the budget has passed. So that's something that we hope to prevent any kind of delays in the future in the passage of budgets. We're also going to, I think a rule change is going to be proposed that no delegate will be paid for more than 5 days in an extended session to consider the budget. So those are a couple things that are being looked at.
That would have killed that bill.
Delegate Patel?
Thank you. I certainly agree with a lot of what's already been said about the budget. And this will be my 26th year in the House of Delegates, and I can tell you that most years we did have a 1 week budget extension that Senator Beach talked about, and normally we got a budget within that length of time. Chairman Nelson, who is the House Finance Chairman, did meet separately, just briefly, with the Republicans and then with the Democrats on Monday, and this was some of the things, kind of a summarization of the what possibly would be the executive budget. You know, in the year we're in, fiscal year right now, we're about 15 million under estimate, which is not bad at all. It's already been said, we don't anticipate any mid-year budget cut, and hopefully, we'll be able to make that up between now and June. Chairman Nelson did tell us that the projected deficit for 2019 is around $200 million, and that would be much better than what it has been the previous 2 years. It has here some of the departments, what we're asking for. Under higher education improvement request was shared program funding for $4.5 million, deferred maintenance $10 million, West Virginia State land grant match, and CTC level budget request. So, I'm certainly hopeful that we can, get a budget on time, possibly having to do the 1 week extension. You asked about the inventory tax. I certainly want to take a close look at that. I mean, I can tell you that when the Democrats were in the majority, every time we looked at this, we couldn't find a way to do it without devastating county commissions and public education. We could not find a way to do it. And it's my belief, even if you phase that out, then you're going to have to put that money someplace else. Are you going to put that on property tax? Because property owners, believe me, they're not going to like that either. And it may be an unfair tax. I know probably most of you in this room don't like it, and I agree with you. But we have to find a way, if we're going to do it, we have to find a way to do it without devastating county commissions and county boards of education.
At this point, it's difficult not to simply repeat something that's already been said, so I'll try to be original, but I don't know that I can promise that. You've heard my colleagues say that it looks as if the shortfall won't be as bad as it has been. I tend to agree with that supposition, but with that, if my household was continually operating at a loss, albeit a small loss compared to last year's loss, we would probably still find something to change it, something to do, because you can't continue to live like that. That's a risky proposition. So how small this shortfall may be by comparison of last year's, I still think we need to look at something to balance the budget. I would tend to disagree with cuts, but we need to do something. I would be more in favor of revenues. And in this time, Ashley, as you talked about the business inventory tax, in this period when we're having a hard time balancing that budget, when West Virginians at the local level are feeling that local hurt, I don't know that this is a time when we could eliminate that. Certainly not without looking at some other funding source to make up and bridge the gap.
Thank you, all of you. To drill down a little bit more, because I will tell you that when we surveyed our members, by and far, tax reform was one of their primary concerns. And they had some specific questions about some specific taxes that I'll mention in a moment. But since the inventory tax has come up a couple of times, for those of us who don't know, could one of you explain what that tax is and how it works and how much it generates for the state?
Dave, you have the numbers on that? I don't have the numbers. I apologize.
This is when we,
I don't
we
have.
need,
Rodney?
we
The
need,
county would lose 5.8 million, the school system Montague County will lose 15.3 million if it goes through.
Yeah.
Per year. That I can tell you. Right.
Yeah, somewhere statewide, it generates somewhere between 60 and 75 $million, and that would have to be made up somewhere else. I think it would really be a wash for business, because the increase would be added to the real estate tax. So real estate taxes would go up. So I think it would be really harmful to the schools and the counties and cities, and wouldn't benefit business that much.
So as I mentioned, there were some comments on our surveys about some other kinds of taxes, property taxes being one of them, and Delegate Piles, I know you're uniquely situated to talk about that, but there were also questions about potential tax credits or tax relief for people who put their students in private schools. There was a question about the tax credits on mortgage interest, and there was a question about it was really a tax relief for to promote travel and tourism. And I bring those up specifically because I want our members to know that we are going to raise the issues that they raise with you on their behalf. And maybe you're not prepared to talk about those specific line items right now, but please make a mental note of it and take it to Charleston with you. These are things that are on the hearts and minds of our members, and we'd like for you to keep those in the back of your mind as well. Do any of you have any comments about those kinds of taxes?
Go ahead. Yeah. I just wanted to say, and I know everybody's talking about tax reform, and we're talking about tax reform also at the federal level. And I don't know what's going to happen at the federal level. I know that there's a bill in conference right now, but I think we need to definitely see what happens at the federal level and how that's going to affect, West Virginia. That's something that we really need to take into consideration. I know that Senator Manchin was talking about the bill that passed in the Senate, which he voted against, and he was saying he's getting all kinds of calls from the coal industry now about that it's a bad bill. So we really need to take that into consideration also.
Go back to the inventory tax, if we could, just for a second. One of the things being discussed in Charleston in regards to the inventory tax is not just eliminating it altogether, but actually giving the option to the counties to deal with the issue on an individual basis, whether they want to eliminate it altogether, whether they want to phase it out, or put something in play to, follow along with that phase out, so that you're picking up the monies on this back end, whether it be through natural gas or whatever it may be, or some kind of other type of small tax here in the community. But that's one of the things and also we've been discussing a credit also, but credits usually fall on deaf ears in Charleston, have for many years, not just this administration. So it's something we just have to consider in the future.
I need to speak about the inventory tax. I will tell you, that is a killer, I do believe, in the state of West Virginia to businesses. Not only in the fact that they have to pay that tax and out there, but they also have to do the inventory, which takes a lot of man hours in order to do that. So I understand clearly what they want to do by doing away with the inventory tax. I also understand that it will, serving as a board member on school boards here, it will put a devastation upon local boards and on counties. And some counties can absorb that, and some is not going to be able to absorb it in that. So that is the part, the chicken and the egg concept that you're faced with down there. The thing also on the other side of it, what you would hope that if you done away with the inventory tax, you would get some of the businesses that stops buying stuff toward September to October to continue to stock and to continue to keep that inventory moving, because they don't want stuck with it to have to pay a tax on something that they may not be able to use. That may release that. But the other thing is, you would hope that it would bring more businesses in, because it's clearly looked at when businesses are coming in or wanting to come into the state of West Virginia. They're looking at what they have to pay out there in taxes. I will tell you that we did get a number yesterday that we're the 18th in the nation as far as their tax. When business comes in, look, that's pretty darn good. I mean, 17 other states are better than us, and we certainly got room to move. But just to simply not to look at the inventory tax, I think we're going to be hard pressed if we don't, because that's been pointed out to us time and time again, that is one of the big impediments that we have out there for business to work. So we have to look at it. I don't particularly, and I don't want to push that down upon property owners altogether as an increase in property taxes. We enjoy a low property tax. There's no doubt about it. All you have to do is just go about 5 miles across the border into Pennsylvania, you'll find out we pay considerably less in property taxes. I still don't, I don't want to make that go up any higher because at this point in time, there is people that can't afford that. So it is something that's going to be discussed. There will be bills come out of it. And quite frankly, I don't know what the answer to that is at this point in time. We continue to work at that. That was part of the interims that we worked on down there. And if somebody has the answer, God bless them, and I'm ready to follow them. If that is the answer that they can come up with, that we can do this and not do more harm, I'm all for it. But at this point in time, we're still discussing that.
Thank you. So we're running a little bit, we started a little bit late, and I want to make sure that we leave time for questions from our audience. So this one I'm going to ask a show of hands on. You all touched on it a little bit, the Roads to Prosperity and the road bond that passed and how well it did in the counties that are in our region up here. There's a priority list. I'd like to get some commitment from you on do you support the priority list that's out there? And so just show your hands. Okay.
No brainer.
I thought that would be an easy one. And transportation is an issue that this chamber has championed and really led the way on over the last several years. So we're very happy to see where.
If I could touch on base on it, is we have a unified effort here, and I say unified because here just recently, all of us sitting here, well, except for Dave, it didn't apply to Dave, met with the Commissioner of Highways to ensure that those projects stayed in play, especially our northern access point. So that's something that we all took time out of our schedules to do and drive to Charleston to meet with the Commissioner, and he has assured us that the thing would continue to move forward.
Along with Delegate Fleshire,
Yes,
she was also
yes, thank you.
attendant.
All right, there were some other areas, things that our members would like us to talk about, and we will address those. But before we get to those things, if we have time, I want to let you all have some discussion with our elected officials. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Bill Rice, and 1975, I virtually was underground here. And I was the same way with Joe Statler. At that time, there was about 10,000 people in this county that were employed in the coal business or related businesses to that. It's estimated between 75, 85, somewhere in that neighborhood, that 70% of the raw product of coal left the state. So you got severance money to fund whatever you wanted to fund. In the Reagan years, when electricity was in demand because the economy was booming, about 70 to 75% of the electricity left the state, of what you got paid for being generated here. You go down I-79 or start here in Westover Park, go down to Lewis County, turn off to 119 to Beckley, you'll see thousands of feet of gas pipe laying there to be installed in the ground. What we're, in my opinion, going to find out, when that pipe goes in the ground, we're going to have something like I-77 and I-79 because the force pooling, the joint tenancy, the severance tax of our bordering states, particularly Ohio and Pennsylvania, will feed the pipeline that goes to Charlotte. I mean, I've been in this fossil fuel business for a long time. I think it's time to make a move. It's come up in front of the legislature, what, 3 times now, 4 times, Bob?
I'm not following your line of questioning here.
The force pooling, co-tenancy,
Joint
severance
development.
tax on gas, you know, the property owner's rights for the minerals. It's been there 3, 4, 5 years now. It's time to make an issue with the MOU that the Chinese are willing to put here, because if we put the pipe in, it'll be pipe of gas from Pennsylvania and Ohio that goes through the state to Charlotte, much like the Coldmans did in the 70s and the 80s.
Well, my personal feeling is where we will gain the most ground is with the hubs that will be located in West Virginia. And from that point, what I see is, personally, I see an advantage for us in creating those smaller cottage industries for those organizations or businesses that can't afford to the shipping costs on that fuel, on that natural gas, that they locate closer to that hub, so that they can begin creating these little pockets of job opportunities for the state of West Virginia. But you are correct. We are going to have to go back in and address the new word, catchphrases, joint development. We are going to have to go back, and we will see that before the legislature again this year.
Is there support for it down there?
I mean, that's a property rights issue, and that's the most, probably right now, that's probably the most volatile issue before the legislature at this point in time.
I don't see how we afford to not to address it with the Chinese making their investment.
Well, I believe for that MOU, and granted, there's not a person in this room who's probably seen that MOU, but I believe that in the governor's State of the State address, that he's going to be bringing forward legislation that will directly impact the terms of that MOU.
Is there other comments?
I will say that it is in a serve on energy, and we're looking at different bills that will come before us on this issue. And there's a world of difference between pooling, co-tenancy, joint development. So when you're talking about this, you're talking different concepts that's out there. I will tell you, and I told you a little while ago, I won't tell you what I'm going to vote or how I'm going to vote. This one I'm 99.9% sure on, that we have to give some certainty to the industry out there that they have a way of developing these. And it'd take a long time to go into it as to how these sites are set up and how they make, where they're going to go. The biggest problem I can see that we can take care of, at least on my standpoint, I don't know how the rest will do, is co-tenancy. And to explain co-tenancy to you shortly, if you have 10 people that owns 100 acres of gas rights out there, and say whatever the percentage will be that they come up with, right now it looks like it'll be 75% of those 10 people agree to sell that, but the rest don't want to. In West Virginia, you can't divide that gas property. So if you have those 10 people, you can't simply say, well, if one person doesn't want to sell their rights, you just set that 1/10 of that off the 10 acres to a side, and it just stays there and it's not touched. It doesn't work that way. Wherever that 10 acres is in that 100 acres, you don't know. So I can say to you, I'm going to block you. And I know a person out there, a person that owns 1/4 of an acre of property, and because he fell out with a family member, this particular piece has 300 and some heirs on it. Because he fell out with a member of that family years ago, he said he'd be dead and cold in hell before he ever signed. Well, that's great. I mean, that's his. He can do that. But he's holding everybody else. So how can we not say this is property rights in reverse? When somebody, and there's more reasons than that out there, I'm sure, but how can we hold everybody up from enjoying a development that's well in their ownership if we let one person? Now, there is a way of doing it. Partition. You can go to court and have partition suits. Lengthy, expensive, and no certainty to the industry. I'm telling you, we have to embrace, whether we like it or not, we need to embrace a responsible gas industry coming into this state, because we're sitting on great reserves. And unless we change the way we do life, we're going to need those reserves. So we have to give some certainty out there to the industry. I will look at all the bills that comes out, but that one I can guarantee you, as you can tell, I'm starting to get a little passionate about it, that we have to do something, and I am ready to move forward.
All right, well, you mean get the fire extinguisher? No, I understand where you're coming from. Anybody else want to make a comment about this issue?
Just going back to an underlying theme he had here, but he didn't say, was the fact that we need education out there in the communities. I mean, you folks did a wonderful job with the road bond and getting the education. That message needs to get out in the community, that these guys aren't necessarily the bad guys. We've done a lot of work in our communities in regards to fracking and reining those guys in on how they do their job. We've not had an incident since we did that legislation. Same thing could happen here. I think we just have to move cautiously, and it's an education issue.
Thank you.
Chad?
Yeah.
Real quickly, it appears the southern part of the state keeps shifting the tax structure to the counties. So my question then is the regional jails. I mean,
Taking time.
what are we going to do about the regional jails? And also, is there a possibility of building another one, say, in Marion County? It's killing us.
Tom, as you know, that's a ticking time bomb. Not just from your perspective, but what's going on inside the prison system itself.
Okay.
The lack of security guards.
Right.
I mean, it's a horrible issue, and something's going to happen that's going to have to push us over the edge before the legislature to actually take it serious, and the governor for that matter.
You know, I can tell you one thing that I would support out there is, I don't know if there's going to be another regional jail built. It all comes down to money. But the way that I can look to see that I would support getting some more money into this is simply the people that pays fines and stuff. I know you don't like to hear it, but put an additional fee on it would go to help in this situation. We have to fund it. And I will say that that's one area that you could do. We all have that choice to make. If we go down the road and speed, we know we're speeding. So if we have to pay a ticket and I have to pay a little bit more and it goes toward that cause, it would be identified to go toward the cause not only of the jails and the cost of the counties, but also we've got to do something to correct not only the corrections officers, it's a pay altogether in the state of West Virginia, some of our state employees, the DOH, you know, they're going to have a hiring fair. They can't get people to come to apply. You're advertising $9 an hour jobs, that type of thing. Somehow we've got to correct this situation. Benefits is great, but I'm here to tell you right now, as a young person, when they go out and look at benefits, they're not enticed by the benefits as much as an older person is, because one, they're not looking toward retirement. They're a long time out. Two, they don't care about health care because they're healthy and they're generally not the ones using it. So those enticements that's out there is not working to get who we need to get into these jobs. We've got to do something.
Other comments from the panel?
Yeah, I'm working with a group of legislators. One's from the Northern Panhandle, the rest are Central and Southern West Virginia. They all have prisons in their districts. And we've done some jail tours, and these guys make $21,000 a year starting out. They're losing these guys to McDonald's. They're taking jobs at McDonald's over this. One of the jail tours, I wasn't able to be on this one, but they had 15 guards for 535 inmates. I mean, it's crazy. And one of my friends, Chad Lovejoy, who's a delegate from Huntington, he was up there and he saw somebody getting the crap kicked out of him, and he said to the guard, he notified him, and the guard said, yeah, we'll get somebody down there. It wasn't 20 minutes later before somebody was able to get down there. So it's a huge issue, and obviously I don't have any any jails in my district, so something that we're working on that they're going to try to help us with up here is looking at that regional jail issue, because the amount of prison population that we must send down there, Tom, compared to the rest of the counties must just be staggeringly slanted. So we need to get some help with that.
Chad?
Yes, Chad Grazer, I'm chairing the chamber this year, so I want to first of all thank you guys for being here today very much, and thank you for your leadership on the road issues. That's obviously been something the chamber's been advocating for a really long time. Really happy to see that come to fruition, and thank you for your leadership on that. On that front, as well as broadband, it's really good to see the broadband initiatives get passed in the last legislative session. I've got kind of a two-part question. I'll start with just on the economic development front. Those were two really good pieces of legislation that passed last year. Anything like that you see coming in the next legislative session? I'll start with that, and then I've got a follow-up question after.
I'm not aware of anything.
You know, that was brought up yesterday in labor and industry, into the fact it's another one of those things that has to take place. Infrastructure, it's got to be put in place in West Virginia before we can truly attract some of the industry that we want into this area. I can tell you, I know enough about broadband, the mid-mal, and some of those other issues to just basically kill myself. I mean, I went out this morning and forgot my cell phone. Now, who does that? And that's the heartbeat to other people. But I will say that it is something that's keenly out there that we're looking at, and we're trying to come up with what it needs to be. I simply believe we're going to have to invest some more state funding into that area, because I think some of these things, when you do them, it's a little bit like the inventory tax. Right, wrong, or different, you try to do some things to get the industry to come in, because if there's one thing I know for sure, in order to keep our tax base low, the more we share that load with everybody else, the more businesses and everything else that we get in here, that means that we can lower the tax rate on any individual. It's simple math, and that's what we have to do. But for me to tell you, and I don't know of the strong legislation that's out there, again, it's something that has to be worked on.
The loan program you guys put into place last year, I know it's just in its infancy stages, but that, you know, I'm a banker as well. That was good. I mean, that's a really good way to, it's not a traditional loan program to loan into broadband. It's more, you know, big companies do it, use equity for that kind of, but it's hard to get people to do that in rural parts of America. So to have that private partnership available that was big. I thought that was a really good thing. I see some momentum building in that regard. So I was curious if there were any other ideas like that that are being considered in this year's legislative session. If there are none, that's fine too. I can follow up with the second question because it kind of tees up what you just said.
Yeah, well, I'm not aware of anything along those lines, but let me ask you a question. Are you aware of anyone who's taking advantage of it or in the process? Very good.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I won't go into details.
Yeah, I understand.
But yes, very, very aware, keenly aware of one that's very active right now.
Very
That's
good.
pretty substantial. So.
Good.
Yeah. So the follow-up question, you were hitting on the inventory tax. So it's, I mean, you're right, it's very simple math. It's just money in and money out, and we've got a function, government. Obviously, we got the county commissioners here, and this is not, we got, I covered the state of West Virginia in my role. We got one of the best county commissions in the state, if not the best. So this is not a, poke at them or anything like that. But we look at, Rhode Island has 3 counties. Hawaii has 3 counties. Delaware has 3 or 4 counties. Allegheny County in Pennsylvania has 1.9 or 2 million people. Our state has that many, we have 55, right? It kind of screams for, there's an opportunity to lower inventory taxes, and there's an opportunity to be more efficient in government. Any thoughts on, how we can move that forward?
I will say to you that if you look at the taxing structure and you say you would done away with the inventory tax, you're going to press on some counties that's very much tight on their budgets. You could possibly force them into saying, I give up. What am I going to do? I don't know how I'm going to run my school system. I don't know how I'm going to run my county. I'm not personally in favor of that. I don't want to force any county into basically, it wouldn't be bankruptcy, but it is bankruptcy. They've done everything they can do to move forward. It's a concept, it's out there, it needs looked at, it needs a lot of talk. There is some issues out there. Who wants to give up their county governance in the fact that this local school board will feel maybe they don't have as much local control? I will tell you, sitting on the school board from the western end of Montague County, it's no secret that I believe it was the 3rd time or maybe the 4th time that I ran that I was able to get a seat on there. It's simply, if you're from a smaller district, a smaller area, it's harder to get some of those coveted seats to even get a voice out there. So now if you take this concept and go with one Board of Education, say covering 5 counties, 6 counties, whatever the number is, some of those issues will come up to where some people will not be able to get what they feel they can be heard in the process. So there's some disadvantages to it in that. Money-wise, it probably is all advantages. And any time you can reduce government, I will tell you, it's probably a good thing, because government in itself costs money. And there's no doubt about that. And in this state, we're one of the highest regulated and highest amount of government people on the payrolls of any state in the nation. And as we talked about the budget earlier, you can't sustain that. It just cannot be sustained in that way. So some way we have to do that type of downsizing, but we need to do it responsibly. We need to make sure that those areas will all still have some type of hearing at today.
Thank you, Delegate Sadler. Thank you, Chad, for your question. I'm glad you asked it, because the Government Affairs Committee for the Chamber is looking at government efficiencies as a way to improve our situation collectively as a state, but in particular to lead the way up here in this part of the state. And it's a, I don't want to say consolidation, because that's a dirty word.
Yeah, it is a dirty word.
But I will say that, Senator Beach, you may have seen there was a bill that came out in the Senate last session. I think it was 534. Senator Colombo and some others authored it, and it created incentives for governments who are willing to. It had something to do with the jails.
And you
too.
will see that bill coming back again.
I'm
Yes.
glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So I know Delegate Williams wanted to make a comment about this.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept, but I think when you apply it to rural parts of our state, I think it would leave people with a lack of a local government that they could find close to go to. So if you had, you know, the central new county seat was in Madison and you had someone coming from Putnam, you know, that could take an hour and 20 minutes some way. So I think it's difficult to do, but it's something I'll always remain open to if you'd like to talk after the meeting.
I'm thinking, Chad, that you actually brought that question up last year. I don't know why I'm thinking that. It's a good question.
Yeah, I think it's, the efficiencies are out there. We can see all the benefits of it. I agree with Joe that Lynn just shared. Get into some of these rural pockets of West Virginia, it becomes more difficult. But instead of making it a detriment, like, oh, we can't make it an incentive. You know, here's how it's going to make it better for you. Your lives will be better. Your school will be better. Here's how it will work. So that incentive bill, I think, we'd have you guys look strongly at that. See.
Yeah, we just need to keep talking, and we'll stumble across an idea. I promise you that.
Pursuant to that, would there be consideration, let's say, of making a county home rule as Montague County as a pilot project to see if possibly efficiencies could be achieved in that manner rather than
Commissioner, I'm all in favor of that. I would even sponsor that piece of legislation for you.
Thank you.
Progress.
Good job, Commissioner.
Okay. Yes, Denny.
So I'm with the Chamber's Transportation Committee, and I really appreciate kind of everyone's efforts working on transportation and working on the road bond issue and passing it at such a high margin. Now, sort of, as everyone knows, the real work begins as we try to use that money and implement that money within the time available, the time allotted, and have the projects that were scheduled to be in our area come to fruition. So as we're working on that, and as you hear from your various constituents here, and as you hear from Division Highways persons and kind of everybody, what happens, and this is kind of for you all, but it's also for chamber members. I know I'm in the Suncrest area, and I know in my area, they're working on a roundabout. There's also a large northern bypass that we're talking about. So there are always going to be people who are in that route who need to be treated fairly and a route selected very carefully and lots of public involvement. However, we're never going to all agree, and if we disagree to the extent to where projects don't go through in our area, I think we could have a snowball effect where the Division of Highways doesn't want to work with us.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So as business owners who whose property may be in one of these routes, as people whose homes will be affected, as we're making these decisions, I think we need to kind of keep our eye on the ball to where we get these projects moving forward. So that's for chamber members, and that's for, and do you all have, I know that some of you have close ties with Division of Highways, do you all have suggestions for how we can best keep things moving compared to letting them get stalled out as we have public hearings, and there are going to be disagreements, and I keep hoping that Division of Highways will see there's disagreements, but we voted at a really high percentage, and we're going to need you all to back us up on that.
Well, that's exactly the conversation we had with the Department of Highways when we paid the visit to them.
Right.
And that was the message we were trying, Joe was trying, all of us were trying to get through the Department of Highways, is to stay the course. You know, we don't want another West Run debacle where they just take their money and walk away.
Right.
And it's not one person in the community or 5 people calling the shots. There's a lot of things that can happen for the community, a lot of benefit to the community, and relocation is difficult. There's no question when we're doing projects like this. I believe we have a kinder, gentler Department of Highways, and meeting with them, I think they have their people skills are a little better, and that they're willing to sit down and talk with these folks in an open forum and listen to them. But they understood at the same time that here just recently during our road bonds debate that you had one room here of 55, 70 people that were just up in arms against this, but there was an underlying current why they were there. And we were trying, when we visited Charleston, we were trying to put that fire out, and I think we were successful at that. But I think we just need to keep that communication, everybody keep that communication with the Department of Highways.
It's ideal for chamber
Absolutely.
and public officials and
Yeah.
people on the ground, people in Charleston.
And
The one thing, oh, go ahead.
And I know that you have a date in Charleston planned soon. I hope the Department of Highways is one of those folks that you're stopping to see.
We are working on our agenda.
Good, that's great, that's great, great.
I will tell you that one of the things that I firmly believe that we have to do in this community is we have to stay positive on moving forward on this. And when I say that, the negative voice will always be heard that's out there. And a few naysayers can make it look like everybody's opposed to something when that's the furthest thing from the truth. That we need to, as a community, if you believe in it, if you think this is a project and you're correct, this thing is early in. The route's not been completely decided, and there's a lot of things to go in there, and we need to keep the public involved. You know, they need to know every inch of the way, and I will say that's one good thing about MPO and Bill Austin being in this area, is to be able to keep that kind of conversation open. But for people to simply stand back and say they didn't know the meeting was going to go on and this was going to happen or that, when all the advertisement in the world is out there, I find a little bit of problem with that, a little issue. We will never give a 100% agreement on any matter. You can't get 100% agreement of us up here sitting at the table. Although we can talk and we can work with each other, and we do all the time. But please, keep the positive thinking going out there. I do believe that this community is more in favor of those projects moving forward than the opposition that's out there. So let's work as hard as the opposition will, saying we don't need this. As a group that we want it moving forward, let's work as hard as they do for a change and say, listen, Mr. Smith, Mr. Williams, we may not agree 100% with what you're going to do, but please keep this thing moving forward and do it in a manner that's mindful of those and respectful of those, that they understand that there is room for differing opinions, but at the end of the day, we need this to happen.
So we do have time for more questions and comments. I want a couple of housekeeping matters. Thank you for saying that, Delegate Statler, because one of the questions that I wanted to make sure we put out there is, how can the chamber help you all advance our interests and our issues and our community up here? So that's something that I'd like to have dialogue on forever, not just today. But also wanted to let everyone know that the Government Affairs Committee is meeting right after we finish here today, and anyone is welcome to stay. We will be planning, working very hard on our Mon County Day at the legislature agenda and seeing if we can outshine Preston County this time. So just so that you all know, there will be a meeting after this event in this room. If you'd like to stay, please do. If you're feeling shuttled out, it's because we're going to have a meeting. But I know there was a question back here. Okay,
I just wanted to say on the road issue, in addition to everything that's been said, when the Department of Transportation has public comment periods, like for example on Route 2 from Proctor to Kent. Proctor is just on the northern end there of Wetzel, and then Kent's over in Marshall. They've already had a meeting with the public comment, and they had like 3 various options. You need to make sure that you go, and you need to make sure that you public comment when those, when I don't know when they're going to be, but you need to go. Those will be advertised and everything. It's real important to do that.
Okay.
One thing that relates to that, I talked to Tom Smith yesterday, and he said he sort of regrets this, but he appreciates the fact that he has actually put out that anyone can make suggestions. Just because it was on the list or not on the list does not necessarily mean that a project is off the table. So anyone can contact the DOH with additional projects, and they will take that into consideration.
Okay. You've been waiting for a while, so please.
My name is Jason Donahue. I'm the owner of Field Realty here in town, and I wanted to provide a suggestion. To be quite candid, I think that's one of the roles the chamber should provide, is we should give you guys projects, suggestions, as much as anything else. And on Chad's comment about an economic development project, I would like to suggest one. I think it's relatively simple. It wouldn't cost the state any money that I'm aware of. But I would like to see the creation of the Mountaineer Trail Network, which is basically a bicycle trail park here in Morgantown that is based on the Hatfield McCoy Trail success in the southern part of the state. It would be for mountain bikes only, but the idea is to use all of the unusable property in a productive way. Here being one, this is on top of the mountain, bottom down here, in between is a whole lot of acreage that has no use. But if we can put these trails on these unusable properties, we could have a huge tourist attraction right in the middle of town that's connected to a whole bunch of different municipalities. One of the biggest criticisms of the hotel system is the lack of hospitality and hotel. We have over 1,000 hotels within 2 miles here. And a large part of it is because of what you guys supported with the TIP district. But we could take 1,000 acres across the road, hundreds of acres here, have miles of mountain bike trail on completely unusable property. And all it would take would be the same legislation that we have for the Hatfield McCoy Trail system, which would take away the liability of the private property owners. Tied into the rail trail, and it's consistent with the West Virginia forward concept of high-end tourism, because at the end of the day, those mountain bikes are $500 to $5,000. We have 12 to 15 million people within a 3.5-hour drive here, most of which are flat. It could be year-round. It generates tax revenue because it's somebody else's money. OPM is always good for tax revenue. And so we could actually use the capacity we have here, but we use somebody else's revenue to pay for something that we have. So I would actually encourage you to drive a deal that's identical to the Hatfield McCoy Trail system, so to speak, but it simply takes away the establishes the network. We can figure out how to design and all that stuff later. That's what we did with Hatfield McCoy Trail. I was actually part of that way back then. But it's a very simple idea that could create substantial money and revenue, which is something we all need, and it's not really controversial at all. So cities we've had preliminary conversations with the city, very preliminary. We're encouraged by the idea. The county seems to be encouraged by the idea. It's a specific request that could be a huge return.
I have no issue. I'd like to talk to you further on that and see what your ideas are, because I was in New Orleans last week at the conference, and there was a couple there from South Carolina that talked about they can come into West Virginia and have been for a few years now, just to simply come to the Hatfield and the McCoy Trail. And I know mountain biking is a huge industry out there that's not probably promoted as well as it should be. I probably would take a little bit of, somehow I would find it hard to believe that the state wouldn't cost them any money, because it always costs us money. A trail starts and then somebody comes and wants some money to put it in. The liability part of it, I will tell you, I have no issue with that. There's lots of issues out there, and I would go into the flooding situation that went on at 100, that some things that has to be done is a good Samaritan law needs given to the people that goes in to help families like that. When you run into terrible electrical systems in a home and you go in, you're trying to put those people back in a home and you can't repair the whole system, you can't get electricians and businesses to come in, because if they can't do it all, and they can't, if they change one little piece of it, then they become liable for the whole thing. A little bit the same thing you're talking about. It'll be interesting to see the details of it, and I'm very interested in it and how we can make that work.
Jason, did you craft the legislation?
No, can't.
No, well, I'm asking, in your role in Logan County, did you have anything?
It was, I was the economic development director.
That's what I thought.
So it was already in works. We just supported it and helped.
Oh, okay.
Let me ask a nuts and bolts question for you all. How does legislation how does it get drafted and to use it? I mean, do you all write the bills yourselves, or? And I ask this question because we, as a committee of the chamber, will send bills to you.
Right.
I mean, we have a member of our committee, Mike Callan, who's interested in the issue of piercing the corporate veil. I can talk to you about that, John. That would like for us to advocate. He wrote the bill and sent it down. So for an idea like that, I think it's wonderful for us to present you with ideas, but how do we make it happen?
And the working relationship I had with Jason on the TIF bill, they wrote the bill. You know, I was just,
It was written by Jack.
It
yeah,
was.
there you go. And so, you know, it's a grassroots effort, really. I mean, you guys are the grassroots. You know, we go down there with preconceived ideas of what we want, but most of the things that I've passed in the last 18 years have been things that have come to me from the community. And I've just latched onto thinking that they're a good idea, and we go forward from there. But on my side of the aisle, we have an attorney who works with each and every one of us to craft the legislation, make sure it's fine-tuned before it goes downstairs to the hopper, so to speak.
So if you have ideas, please bring them to us. We will help facilitate drafting the legislation to get it to them. They will tweak it, they will change it, it will get amended.
No question.
But that's the process, that's democracy, and that's.
I will also say that it can be as simple as somebody giving you a suggestion when you're on the street out there, and you just take that down. I've done it this week and walk into the bill drafting and saying, this is what I want to happen. And they will know what sections of the code to go into to create that, or if it has to be created new. So I will tell you that if you would see a bill that I would write, it would be a one sentence, this is what it's going to be. And it would be challenged in every court of the land. So thank God we have those folks that can do that.
So we have time for one more question, and then we're gonna wrap everything up. Bill?
Sure. Thank you all very much. I'm Bill Austin, Director of the MPO, and I really appreciate all the support that's been shown by our legislative delegation, as well as the local community for our transportation issues. I know that it's having an impact in Charleston, and anything we can do to help continue this momentum of the MPO is there, and we look forward to working with you to make sure our plans are implemented. I think the unified community is vital to getting everything going and keeping it going, and we're working diligently to do that. And certainly our legislative delegation and many of my policy board members in the Chamber of Commerce have all been instrumental in getting this project program and moving forward, and we look forward to keeping them moving forward, including facilitating a public involvement process that will have all the voices heard, and so we come up with projects, final projects that really meet the community's needs and are sensitive to the community's needs. That is crucial. And so thank you all very much, and we really appreciate that. On a more personal level, this is a personal interest, is during the discussion of the opioid crisis and then the regional jail problems and the prison process, I think, and this is a question, a personal question to the legislators, those are two sides of the same coin. That if you don't address the opioid crisis, and you're going to end up with more people in prison. So has the legislature really taken a look at the investment in preventing opioid addiction and addressing opioid addiction and keeping those persons viable in the community and actually productive citizens versus what it costs to incarcerate them, and kind of looked at that trade-off? And I think that's key to both the budget issue and what we were talking about. So that's my personal question.
Well, I'm not on the committee, but I know that study is ongoing. They met this week as well. We'll have a finalized report during the January interims that we'll be able to review, and hopefully we'll have some answers there to your questions right there.
Yeah, please. Bill, I think in terms of what you're talking about, two sides of the same coin, I think we went the opposite way last session in that we increased penalties. I think we had maybe 4 or 5 bills that did that. One was so ridiculous that if an 18-year-old was to smoke a joint with his 17-year-old girlfriend, he could get like 5 years in jail for that because he was smoking pot in the presence of a minor. I mean, I think we're really looking at things with a harsh view on society that's unforgiving and apathetic to people's circumstances. And I don't think that any of the drug dealers who peddle their stuff from Detroit were watching the live feed in the West Virginia House of Delegates saying, oh crap, we got to stop doing this. They just increased penalties on this stuff. You know, so we got to look outside of that. Obviously, we do need to send a message that this type of behavior isn't meant to be encouraged, but when we're paying our prison guards $21,000 a year, they're more likely to get a shiv to the back than they are a pay raise. I don't know how we can just keep overpopulating those jails.
And I don't want to oversimplify this by any ways near means. And again, I don't have a lot of knowledge of this, but I will tell you that when we talk about the penalties on these, most of the time when they're arrested, it's not the user. It's not the user that we're trying to put in prison. We actually need to get help to them. And Bill, to answer part of your question, it's very encouraging to see the federal money that's coming down. I think $20 million was put into West Virginia, and I believe, for some reason, I'm thinking that's the number. And the DHHR will look at that money and how it's best used out there. I'm not sure how that will be used, but some of it needs to be in the way of prevention and working with those folks that when they're caught, especially on the first time, that we get the help to them. Something out of the bill that we thought was very good and useful when we talk about things going out there, and I believe it's when we allow the EMS and everybody else to give the Narcan to the folks that overdoses. What we're finding out now is we've done something that we thought, and I still believe this is the right thing to do. Who wants their child to die because they overdosed if you can save them? And that simply works to do that. But what we're finding now, instead of overdosing once, they're overdosing multiple times a day, or they're forming clubs where one will stay, like the designated driver, will stay and make sure there's somebody there to call for help to get them to come in. So we're going to have to look at that bill and probably retweak it. When you have EMS groups coming in saying we've had to respond up to 8 times for one person in a 24-hour period, there's something wrong. So I think there's probably going to be some legislation that's looked at out there that will say, we've come in and we've administered this and we saved you, but you know what? There's a requirement to it. Now you have to go to drug rehab. You have to do something. We simply got to change the system. We can't let it be used. It's not to cost as much that sometime you're not going to be there and available for them. So, Bill, long answer to your thing is that the federal money is starting to come in, and we're ground zero for the crisis. I hope, and we have people that can do this, better minds than mine, will work on this issue, and I do believe we can turn it around.
Anything else from the delegates? Let's thank the delegates for their time. I also want to thank again the sponsors. Kimberly Thompson's in here now from Courtyard Marriott. You want to say a few words?
Just really want to give recognition to Southern Airways Express, Mark Sesteri, as he sponsored the breakfast. And Southern Airways has been a really great example of a company who not only to invest in this community to make a profit, but Mark has been committed to really helping our community grow and prosper. And likewise, Ronnie's Gibby Gabriel and Tom Bonney, they built 2 hotels up here in University Town Center. And, obviously, it's to make a profit, but what I really appreciate about Tom and Gibby is they do believe in corporate social responsibility. They believe in helping our community to grow and prosper. So they're happy to offer space like this and partner with the chamber for important events like this. It'll bring, our constituents, citizens together with problem solvers. So we can make this a better place to work and play.
I will say sometimes we're not considered problem solvers. We're considered problem creators.
Again, thank you, Jenny. You took that part out of what I was just going to say.
I didn't do that to you. I'm
But you have a tendency of doing that, but that's all right. We get the same thing done. Mark and Kimberly, we thank you very much for your sponsorship. I also want to thank our co-chairs, Jack Thompson and Ashley Hardesty Odell. Got it right there. They did a wonderful job. They always do a wonderful job. As Ashley mentioned, we are having a government affairs meeting after this. We have many members here. Would like you to stay. You're also welcome to stay, even if you haven't been a member before. I also want to. Any sort of event like this takes teamwork. I always say anything good in life always takes a team. And so I want to recognize Terry Cutright, Nikki and Kelly for all their. Finally, Government Affairs Committee is very active. It's the board recently reviewed a proposal from me and from the Government Affairs Committee. If you have a legislative idea, we're going to keep the legislative survey monkey up there. You can get in there. If you have if you want a particular bill or proposal, even if it's just an issue that isn't into bill format, go to our last newsletter, and it was listed out the very process. Basically, it comes to me for discussion. We talk about it, sort of formulate it, give it to Government Affairs. Then it goes back to formal legislation, help you find a way to write formal legislation, and it will very much mostly involve the delegates or the senators in that process as well. Then it will come back to Government Affairs for final. Oh, by the way, we send it out all the membership, because basically we've adopted a policy that says if it's good for one member and doesn't hurt any other member, we're going to fight for it. So the Government Affairs Committee is very, very active now. We're really moving on trying to help the delegates accomplish many of the things they talked about, the delegates and the senators. So look at that process, and then eventually it goes to the board for final endorsement. So we have an actual process to get an idea to legislation to the delegation. So go to that last newsletter. I want to thank all of you that came and participated. We're going to have regular government affairs events, and we hope you continue to come out and be active. So give yourself a hand.